Ever feel like you're just, scratching the surface of a really big idea?
Mhm.
You want to get right to the heart of it, that core aha moment, but without wading through tons of jargon. Well, that's exactly what we try to do here on the Deep Dive.
Mhm.
We take complex source material, really dig in, and pull out the key insights for you.
And today we've got a really fascinating one. You shared this dialogue from the other side, metaphysics and meaning, and it dives right into the deep end of ethics and knowledge.
Yeah, it really
It
does.
shows how a perspective that seems, well, pretty straightforward on the surface can lead to some really surprising complications.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to follow this intellectual path, right? To understand the arguments about why setting up solid ground for uh, morality and even knowing things,
Mhm.
why that's tougher than you might think.
And there's a real twist.
Definitely a twist. Okay, let's jump in.
So the dialogue kicks off with a naturalist, someone who thinks basically everything boils down to nature and its laws.
Hmm.
And he gets asked this really direct question: why is the suffering and death of children actually evil?
And he's surprised by the question itself.
Exactly. Which is telling, isn't it? It
Right.
shows this underlying assumption many people have that some things are just obviously wrong, fundamentally.
Okay, so what's his first response? Gut feeling.
Pretty much. He says it's intuitively obvious, but the counter comes straight back. If it's so innate, like built in, why doesn't everyone agree?
Good point.
It suggests you need more than just a gut feeling. You need actual reasons.
So intuition isn't enough. What next? Feelings, empathy.
Yep, that's the next stop. Emotive theory. The idea that, well, we feel bad when we see suffering, so suffering must be bad. Empathy drives our judgment.
Okay, that sounds reasonable on the surface. We all feel empathy, mostly.
We do, but here's the catch the dialogue points out. Feelings are subjective, right? My feeling bad doesn't automatically make the event itself objectively wrong.
It just reflects my internal state.
Precisely. And people's feelings differ wildly sometimes. So empathy is important, no doubt, but it doesn't give you that solid, objective, moral standard.
Okay, so intuition is shaky, feelings are subjective. What about practical reasons? Like, society works better if we agree certain things are wrong.
That's the pragmatic argument. Societies pick values, don't harm kids, for instance, because it leads to, better outcomes, less chaos, more cooperation.
Seems logical.
It does, but then the dialogue hits you with, how do we decide what counts as a better outcome in the first place?
Okay. It circles back.
Exactly. You need some kind of prior moral standard to even judge whether the consequences are good. What if the whole society is, I don't know, fundamentally unjust? Then helping that society might not be good at all.
So the pragmatic argument kind of assumes the value it's trying to establish.
It seems to presuppose it, yeah.
And there's that interesting bit where the naturalist flips it around, doesn't he?
He does. He asks the other person, essentially, why wouldn't you want to believe harming children is evil? Like, what's the motivation for denying it?
And the response?
It cuts right to the chase. It's not about picking this value versus that value. It's about finding any justification, any grounding for moral beliefs at all if you're sticking strictly to that naturalistic view.
Wow. And this is where ethical nihilism comes into the picture.
That's where it starts to surface. The idea that maybe in the purely natural world described by science, there just aren't any objective moral properties, no inherent good or evil.
It's a pretty bleak outlook.
It can feel that way. The text uses this example. A kills B.
Okay.
From a purely naturalistic view, what is that? It's a series of physical movements. Mass, velocity, impact.
Biological process is ceasing.
Right. Our feelings about it, horror, sadness, anger, those are real feelings, but there are reactions. They aren't properties of the event itself in the physical world. There's no wrongness molecule you can isolate.
So under strict naturalism, a horrific act is fundamentally no different than a rock falling, just physics and biology.
That's the radical conclusion being explored. It's just a physical event. Our values are separate overlays.
And even the pragmatic idea, societal rules for stability.
It runs into the same wall. Even those rules rely on us valuing stability or cooperation or whatever the goal is. And that value judgment itself isn't justified by naturalism alone. It's a moral premise you bring to the table.
So the naturalist, in the dialogue, starts to see this.
He does. That's the fascinating part of this section. He begins to realize that just saying something is truly good or evil, that seems to require stepping outside of just physics and biology.
You have to go beyond pure naturalism.
It seems like you have to dip into metaphysics, thinking about the fundamental nature of reality, not just the observable physical stuff. To ground ethics, you might need to look deeper than just nature.
Okay, so trying to build ethics purely on naturalism hits some major roadblocks, maybe even leads towards ethical nihilism, but then the conversation shifts, gets even more fundamental, right, to epistemology.
Exactly. It pivots to what's called epistemological nihilism.
It is, yeah.
The idea that we can't actually know anything for certain, not even the truth of our own reason.
Whoa, how does that follow from naturalism?
Well, it comes from taking naturalism and determinism, the idea that everything is caused by prior events really consistently.
Okay, determinism. Everything's cause and effect.
Right. So if the mind, our thoughts, our beliefs, if they're all just part of nature,
Then they must be determined too, like everything else.
that's the argument. Our beliefs aren't held because we freely reasoned our way to them. They're the necessary consequence of the chain of cause and effect stretching back through time.
So, wait. My belief that, say, naturalism is true or false isn't based on evidence and logic, but just the atoms bumping around in my brain according to prior causes.
That's the unsettling implication explored in the dialogue. If beliefs are just determined outcomes, what guarantees their truth? How can you claim your belief is based on reason if it was caused?
It pulls the rug out from under. Well, everything, including the belief in naturalism itself.
Precisely. If naturalism implies that all beliefs are determined products of non-rational causes, then the belief in naturalism is also just a determined product.
Yeah.
You can't rationally justify it.
Okay, but surely people push back on this.
Yeah.
There must be counter-arguments in the text.
Oh, absolutely. The dialogue addresses them. One idea is randomness, maybe quantum indeterminacy or something. Maybe there's some chance involved.
Does that help?
Not really, according to the argument. Randomness doesn't equal rationality. If my beliefs are random, that doesn't make them true or justified. It just makes them random, chaotic, not reasoned.
Okay, randomness doesn't save reason. What about evolution? Couldn't evolution have shaped our minds to be rational because being rational helps us survive?
That's a very strong counter-argument, and probably the most intuitive one. Evolution favors creatures that accurately model their environment, right? So our reason must be reliable.
Makes sense.
The dialogue acknowledges this seems right from our perspective, but it pushes back again. Even if evolution selects for survival-promoting models, does that guarantee the truth of those models or the validity of reason itself as a path to truth?
Explain that difference.
Think of the robot analogy used in the text. Robots programmed to avoid obstacles survive better,
Okay.
but they're just following code. They don't necessarily know the obstacle is real or understand why avoiding it is good in some objective sense. Their behavior is effective for survival, but it's not grounded in genuine understanding or truth.
So, our reasoned beliefs could just be complex survival programs, not necessarily reflections of actual truth.
That's the worry raised. Evolution selects for what works, not necessarily for what's true in some ultimate metaphysical sense. Our reason could just be a useful illusion generated by our determined brains.
And this leads to the privileged position problem.
Exactly. If all beliefs, naturalist, theist, whatever, are ultimately just the determined outputs of the same natural, non-rational causal chains,
Then who gets to say their belief is the true one?
right, there's no outside objective vantage point. You can't step outside the system of nature to judge which beliefs caused by nature are actually true. Everyone just believes what the universe determined them to believe.
As the mentor character concludes, right?
Yeah.
Everyone holds the beliefs nature caused in them, believer and non-believer alike.
That's the conclusion drawn within that framework, yes.
Man. So we started questioning ethics, and now we're questioning if we can even know anything. It really feels like hitting a wall, a philosophical dead end.
It does. The text calls it a dark hole. Nihilism seems to loom. No meaning, no objective values, and now maybe no reliable knowledge either.
Is that where the dialogue ends? In the dark hole?
Not quite. This is where it takes that unexpected turn we mentioned earlier. It starts exploring what it calls metaphysical wildcards.
Metaphysical wildcards. Sounds intriguing, like possibilities beyond the strictly physical.
Exactly. The core idea is, what if we entertain possibilities beyond strict naturalism? What if reality isn't only physical stuff governed by deterministic laws?
Like non-physical aspects.
What?
Or the mind having some non-physical part.
Precisely. If the mind isn't just a physical machine, if thoughts aren't purely determined by prior physical states, then maybe objective evaluation, maybe genuine reason, maybe even free will could find a foothold.
How does the dialogue make that plausible? It seems like a big leap.
It draws an interesting parallel. It points out that even our most basic scientific concepts, quarks, electrons, are, in a way, hypotheses. We don't see them directly.
Right, we infer them because they explain things really well.
Exactly. They're explanatory models, and the dialogue suggests that worldviews, like naturalism itself, are also fundamentally explanatory hypotheses.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
If naturalism is an explanatory hypothesis, and following it through logically leads you to the conclusion that knowledge itself is impossible,
Then the hypothesis might be self-defeating.
that's the crucial argument that emerges. If your worldview implies that you can't actually know that worldview or anything else is true, doesn't that impossibility act as strong evidence against the worldview itself? It's like sawing off the branch you're sitting on.
Wow. Okay, so if naturalism leads to this dead end where knowledge is impossible, then maybe naturalism isn't the right hypothesis.
Maybe it's false. And if naturalism, understood as the idea that only nature exists, is false,
Then its opposite must be true, which would be supernaturalism.
in some form, yes. And it's important, the dialogue is careful here. Supernaturalism isn't immediately jumping to one specific religion. It's used more broadly, meaning something exists beyond or outside of the purely natural deterministic system.
Okay, so accepting this possibility, this wild card, how does it help with the problems of ethics and knowledge?
Well, the dialogue then sketches out a hypothetical supernatural scenario as a potential alternative.
What does this scenario look like?
It posits, hypothetically, an eternal being whose very nature is rational and moral. This being creates an ordered universe, a cosmos, not chaos, and designs beings like us with minds that are not purely mechanistic, transcendent minds.
Minds capable of more than just determined reactions.
Minds capable of genuine reason, of grasping truths, and of making moral judgments that aren't just subjective feelings or evolutionary programming.
And how does that hypothetical picture address the nihilism problem?
Well, think about it. If the universe is created by a rational being, that could explain why it's orderly and understandable through science. Knowledge becomes possible because reality itself has a rational foundation.
Okay, that tackles the knowing problem.
Yeah.
What about free will and morality?
If our minds have a transcendent aspect, not fully locked into the physical cause and effect chain, then perhaps genuine free will becomes possible. We can be truly accountable for our choices.
And morality, where does that come from in this picture?
The objective standard for morality could be grounded in the very character or nature of that foundational being. Goodness wouldn't be arbitrary or just useful. It would reflect ultimate reality.
So, this hypothetical, supernaturalism, it offers potential solutions to the very problems that naturalism seemed to create.
That's exactly how it's presented in the dialogue, not as a final, proven answer maybe, but as a coherent alternative framework. A way out of that nihilistic dark hole that seems plausible if you accept that naturalism's own conclusions might point towards its falsehood.
So just to recap this whole journey then, we started asking about a basic moral intuition. Why is harming kids wrong? And following a strictly naturalistic path led to big questions about whether any objective morality could exist. Ethical nihilism.
Right.
Then applying that same naturalistic consistency to the mind itself led to questioning if we can even know anything reliably. Epistemological nihilism.
Well, dark hole.
But then the realization that this very impossibility of knowledge under naturalism could itself be an argument against naturalism,
The potential self-falsification.
which opens the door to considering these metaphysical wildcards like a supernatural framework, which, at least hypothetically, could ground both knowledge and morality.
It's quite the intellectual arc, exploring that tension between a purely natural worldview and our deep-seated intuitions about value and truth.
Yeah, that aha moment for me was definitely seeing how the dead end wasn't necessarily the end, but maybe a signpost pointing in a different direction entirely.
And that leaves a really provocative thought for everyone listening, doesn't it? Consider your own assumptions. What do you think is the ultimate basis for your sense of right and wrong? How confident are you in what you know and why?
Right. Does this whole exploration, this wrestling with naturalism and its limits, raise new questions for you?
Yeah.
Does that idea of a metaphysical wildcard seem like, well, like a possibility worth considering, or just wishful thinking against the darkness of nihilism?
It definitely gives you a lot to mull over, perhaps revisiting your own core beliefs with these arguments in mind.
Absolutely. It feels like we've just scratched the surface again, in a way, but hopefully deeper scratch this time. These are huge questions.
They are indeed. We hope this deep dive into the arguments from the other side has been illuminating and maybe spark some further thought.
Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning.